Okay, so who here thinks it's possible to start new currencies? Should be every hand that's going up, obviously, with Ethereum. Okay, so I'm going to talk to you about what I think comes after cryptocurrency or enabled by cryptocurrency, which is the ability to start new countries. And this is a concept that I'm calling the network state. So there's a book about this. It's at thenetworkstate.com. It's free online. Happened to be a Wall Street Journal bestseller, despite that, and which is very nice. Thank you very much. But I'm going to try to describe the concepts in just a few slides, so that you can have a take-home, like a flavor of the thing, and then if you want it, you can read the whole thing. So the premise for today's talk is that starting new countries is possible, preferable, and profitable, and in that order. And let's start with that first clause, that it's possible to do this, because that's the part that people will be the most skeptical of. So why is starting new countries possible? Well, we know that you can start a new company, that's Google, from a very modest beginning of being in a garage. You can start a new community, Facebook, that's Zuck in a dorm room, the second image. You can start a new currency, that's Bitcoin, from the white paper on a message board. Can we actually start a new country? That's the terra incognita that is yet to be shown. And the basic idea is, if you had, this visual, if you understand this visual, you'll understand the network state. The concept is, if you had a social network which had a physical presence because it crowdfunded territory, not in one place, not like a city-state, but all around the world in many different locations, and the cumulative population, income, and real estate footprint of this social network was comparable to that of a legacy nation state. It had about 1 million something people. And this is what a network state looks like, okay? It also has diplomatic recognition, not shown on the map, but it is recognized by other states. And how would you actually build something like that from scratch? Well, here's how you get to 1 million, okay? Just like Zuck, let's say, Zuckerberg, somebody starts in Tokyo, one person, they're hallucinating that they think they can start a new country, but they recruit 10 something people, 17 people into that collective hallucination. They start living in territory around the world, raising the flag of their imagined community, their invisible country, both of which are names of good books that you should check out. So they're raising the flag of this imagined community, and then they get to 100 something people around the world, and then 1,000 something people, and then 10,000 something, and then 100,000 something. And as you notice, the buildings on the left-hand side become more and more elaborate and sophisticated, from a person in an apartment complex to 5,000 people actually crowdfunding a small town, or a ranch, or perhaps a whole building. And eventually they get to 1 million something people, and now you've got something that's comparable to that of a legacy state. And why is that the case? Why is it that 1 million gets us within country range? Well, that's because actually most countries are small countries. This is a kind of a surprising fact, perhaps, but if you look at the United Nations, 30-something countries have less than 1 million people, and 60-something have between 1 million to 10 million people. Most countries have less than 10 million people. Only a few countries are these giga countries of 100 million plus. And what that means is that by the standards of technology, where we've built not just 10 million, but 100 million and even billion person networks, it's not scale that's actually the limiting characteristic anymore. It's the strength of association that people feel. And if you think about it, people have gone from just being eyeballs in the 90s, just being internet tourists, to being daily active users in the 2000s, logging in every day. In the 2010s, they are holders. They're actually holding digital currency. It's like another step up. And I think in this decade, you actually start thinking of your digital identity as primary, and you start having a digital passport. So motivating this a little bit further, if most countries are small countries, well, the other thing that's kind of perhaps non-obvious is actually the number of countries has been increasing with time. Since the founding of the United Nations, as various empires sort of break up, the British Empire and the French Empire, and then eventually in the 90s, the Soviet Empire, a bunch of new countries get their wings, like Singapore, like India, like Israel, like Estonia, when the Soviet Union broke down. And some of those turn out to be startup countries that actually exceed what they were when they were colonies. And so, for the last 20, 30 years, this graph has been basically flat, with the exception of places like South Sudan and East Timor. But the graph of currencies looked much like this and then went vertical in the 2010s, and I think the graph of countries will. And one way of thinking about that is there's a funny website, it's like CoinMarketCap, but it's called Fiat Market Cap, okay? And it ranks the currencies of the world, the fiat currencies of the world. And you can see that Bitcoin ranks there somewhere between the Turkish lira and the Chilean peso, the last time I looked. Turkey's a pretty big country. And for Bitcoin to rank there, even after the market crash, is actually pretty remarkable. This cloud phenomenon can rank with a traditional, legitimate, country's currency. Ethereum would also be on the list. It's a little bit further down. And then depending, on the time of day, other cryptocurrencies would also rank. But just that one ranks is this really remarkable thing. And so if cryptocurrencies can rank with fiat currencies, could crypto countries rank with fiat countries? If we take a table of all of the countries in the world, the UN recognized countries by population, a network state with 1,729,314 people would rank, somewhere between Bahrain and Latvia, okay? And would post substantial annual growth rates. I know Singapore, Elon, other people have tweeted about bringing the birth rates up. Well, now you have all these type A personalities that want to rank on the leaderboard, okay? So getting to work. And, so via both immigration and reproduction, you could actually start rising on the leaderboard of these network states, okay? And this is how those two are connected. That visual from before shows the census, and then you can rank on this leaderboard. In a different talk, I talk about how you could actually have that census come from auditable oracles, because lots of these groups will want to establish themselves higher, so you need to be able to audit those numbers and show that they're actually valid, that's actually 1 million people around the world. But that's a solvable problem, it's a technical problem. If you can do this though, you start actually having a polity, an entity around the world that starts ranking with legacy states and that can grow like a startup, okay? And that's a really interesting and new thing. Now, of course, simply having a population of that number doesn't instantly mean diplomatic recognition, but you will knock on the door and you'll get rejected the first time and rejected the second time and rejected the third time. If you have 1 million people, though, for a decade or more that actually think of themselves as part of a new country, eventually one of the 100 countries of the world or the thousands of cities will eventually relent and do some deal with you, some form of diplomatic recognition. And why do I feel confident in saying that? It's because sufficient traction already means diplomatic recognition. So just to give some examples, Tuvalu has done deals with GoDaddy for the .tv domain, okay? Colombia has done that as well for the .co domain. Miami and New York, the mayors of those two cities have accepted cryptocurrency for their salary. You have Nevada, the US state, that did a deal with Tesla for the Gigafactory. You have El Salvador that has recognized Bitcoin as a national currency, and Wyoming that's passed a DAO law that recognizes Ethereum-based entities with the traditional legal system. And so given all of those precedents, the point is that sovereigns are actually open for business. The land is already negotiating with the cloud. Okay, you have cities and US states and countries that are already negotiating with companies and currencies that are cloud-based. And so what about crypto communities and eventually crypto countries? So we've established perhaps some, theory as to why it's possible. Now let's talk about why it's preferable. Basically, as one casts one eye around the world today, there's both the push and the pull for new countries. The push is in countries as varied as Sri Lanka or Venezuela or Panama, Iran, all these places, there are riots or civil unrest because the political institutions of the past are failing the people. It's food shortages, it's energy shortages, it's, oppressive government. And on the other side, you have the pull, the same pull that pulled us as a species, from Africa to explore the whole world, that pulled some people to America, with the frontier and the Statue of Liberty, that pulled humans all the way to the moon to plant a flag on the moon. That's the pull of new things, of the frontier, of pioneering. And so that push of necessity and that pull of possibility are kind of the two forces there, very much like cryptocurrency itself, which is for the powerless and the power user. For the person who's just trying to hold on to a bank account somewhere, and for the person who's trying to push the limits of what a bank account can do, it's the person in the developing world, and it's the software developer who wants to move $1 million around the world with a keystroke, or just preserve $1 of their own life savings. So it's this U-shaped curve of the adoption for crypto, and I think that's very similar to the curve for the adoption of crypto countries. So the third point is that starting new countries is profitable. Now I leave this last because it is important to be able to make money on something, but that's the last step. First, you want to determine that it's morally desirable, but economic feasibility is also a concern, okay? So how do we think about this? Well, here's kind of a fun graph of the annual revenue per user of nation states, social networks, and network states. And the bottom right, you see Meta and WeChat and TikTok. It's a log scale on both axes. And so they're in the billions of users, but their annual revenue per user is only in the teens, okay? So you have 3.6 billion users and you make $10, $20 per user. That's $36 to $72 billion per year, pretty good, okay? So that's a traditional definition of ARPU, annual revenue per user. If we think about nation states, those are the flags across the top. In the top left, you have the small nation states that have 1 million to 10 million people, and their annual revenue per user, their tax revenue, is in the multiple tens of thousands of dollars per person, but their base is much smaller, just 1 million to 10 million people. In the upper right corner, you have the US and China, which are the superpowers, respectively, with a very large population and revenue per user, and that's why they're the two superpowers. Now, network states, I think, would nestle right about here, where they are in the million-ish, 10 million-ish range of population. And I do think that you can make about $1,000 per person per year if people are co-living. If you have that physical component, if it is a slice of the rent or thereabouts, that extra margin that comes from just taking a building that would otherwise be unremarkable and having a bunch of people with the same values populating it, you get a physical network effect from them all being in one place, just like everybody here today. And so I do think that network states could actually kind of occupy a different spot in our thinking about monetization. Rather than a utility that's meant to scale to the whole world, it's a community that is meant for a specific group of people, which is a different way of thinking about what we're doing with tech. So that is why I think starting new countries is possible, preferable, and profitable. For the full version, you can read thenetworkstate.com. And thank you very much.